Hi, welcome to Beyond the Paycheck. I'm Paula Christie. We're going to talk with Mark Edelstein from Ross Mortgage, who's been with us, about 3 or 4 times, Mark?
I think this is the third time.
And he actually brought this conversation to me, and I think it's great for those who are considering getting a divorce and interest rates are so high. Do you stay in the home because of that? Do you decide to sell? So Mark's going to help us out with that decision.
You know, as a CDLP, Certified Divorce Lending Professional, I talk to a lot of people all the time about mortgage financing as it relates to divorce. And one of the most common questions I get these days is, how can I assume my existing mortgage that has a very low interest rate and still get my former spouse off of that mortgage and released from liability? Before we go forward, let's define what an assumption is, right? An assumption is somebody new is going to assume the original terms of that financing. In our case, we're talking about a house and a mortgage, but it could be for anything, right? If there's some sort of financing attached to a car, that's assumable potentially, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a broad definition of an assumption. In mortgage, there's 2 types of assumptions. There's a simplified assumption and a qualified assumption. In a simplified assumption, that just means that one spouse, one person in this divorce is going to take responsibility for making those monthly payments and the other obligations that go along with that particular residence.
That means that they're going to refinance it, or?
No, they're just going to assume the payments, the responsibility for making the payments as they are.
So they're not necessarily taking the other spouse off the mortgage?
Not at all. So in an example, let's say that a husband and wife are getting divorced. The husband is the one who is on the mortgage, but the wife was awarded the home. Along with being awarded the home, she has to accept responsibility for those payments. But that doesn't take away the financial obligation that the husband made when he originally took out the mortgage.
So even though she has the simple assumption, if that's the right word, his name will still be on there. He's divorce-wise not obligated, but mortgage-wise, by the mortgage company, he still would be.
In the eyes of the creditor, he's definitely still obligated.
So what's the other assumption?
Well, the other assumption is a qualified assumption. And a qualified assumption is when the person awarded the home assumes those terms and does release that other spouse from financial liability. There's 3 types of mortgages, 4 types of mortgages that are assumable. Any government-insured loan is assumable. An FHA loan, a VA loan, a rural development loan or USDA loan, and most adjustable rate mortgages are assumable.
So let's say we're married and we're getting a divorce and we're in a high interest rate environment and we have to make a decision, because I have clients that are currently going through this right now. She wants to stay in the home, but ultimately she'll have to take his name off of it. But if she does that and has to refinance any portion of that, she's going to be at what, 7.5%, 8%?
Yeah, pretty close to that, in that range for sure.
They could make the decision that he stays on the mortgage.
Correct.
Until maybe interest rates go down.
Interest rates go down, some other event like kids graduating from high school and not needing the school district anymore, and then that's the time that they agree to sell.
But what does that play on his ability to find new housing?
It doesn't. So in our world, that's called a contingent liability. So yes, it's a liability that's on the credit report, but since there's a court order relieving that person from responsibility for the payment, we in mortgage lending don't factor that payment into the borrower's qualifying. Now, if the person who is responsible for the payments does not make the payments and derogatory payment history gets reported to the credit, it's on his credit as well.
That'd be a really spiteful ex-husband or ex-wife to do that, I'd imagine.
Yeah.
That situation, I'm sure, would have to be a very amicable divorce.
Sure.
I would guess one other piece of advice you'd offer here, Mark, is don't stay together just because your mortgage rate is low.
That's true. We definitely don't. You should never really stay together because it's financially convenient anyhow. I don't think.
Because we've all seen that, or even get divorced but stay in the same house. And what's the sitcom where they draw a line right down the middle and this is your side, this is my side?
Right.
Wasn't that the movie Kramer versus Kramer or something?
Was that like War of the Roses?
That was the name of the movie, War of the Roses.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Now, none of this really matters, this assumption talk, if there's an equity buyout where one spouse has to purchase out or has to buy out the other spouse's equity portion, unless that's going to be equalized some other way with some other asset, you can't do an assumption and take money out. So the assumption is not even an option.
Again, let's go back to us getting a divorce. You want to keep the home, and let's say the buyout's $150,000. So I could take $150,000 of another asset and then just sign off on the home. And then you don't have to refi.
Yeah, but you got to be careful what that asset is, right? Like,
yeah, cash.
What happens if I say, all right, I'll give you my $150,000 traditional IRA.
Pass.
And you're like, no, that's not equal because I'm going to pay taxes on that.
Mm-hmm.
When I have to draw on it, that's really not equal, even though the value of those two are equal, at that time.
Right. Now, I just had that conversation with clients this last week that they're not the same. Cash and an IRA, a traditional IRA, are not the same option or same value.
No. So back to the simple assumption. Let's say we are getting divorced. I have the mortgage. You're awarded the home. You have to make payments, but you're not on the mortgage. You're not receiving any information from the loan servicer. How do you start that type of communication with the loan servicer, right? In our case, where that person who was awarded the home is not on the mortgage, they have what's called a successor's interest now because they were awarded the home, and they have all of the same rights as the spouse borrower, as far as the servicer has to send them the monthly statements, has to allow them to create a profile on their website to manage the mortgage. They're given the same grace period of those 15 days after the first of the month for the payment to be due. They have access to the escrow account. They have all of the same rights as the actual obligator on a mortgage, but they're not on that mortgage. It also prevents the servicer from executing the due on sales clause because there is a transfer that takes place when that house is awarded to that spouse. If that spouse isn't on the mortgage company can say, hey, there was a transfer. We are going to call that loan due. That law prevents them from being able to do that.
Okay, Mark, talk to me like I'm a fifth grader because I didn't get that. So there's a law. I don't need to know what the name of the law is, but there's a law that says that I'm not the original person on the mortgage. Correct? You are.
Correct.
But I can take over that mortgage and still have all the rights that you do.
Correct.
Is there anything else that I missed?
No.
Then I guess I got it.
No, you got it right. Yeah.
Okay, but how does that affect you?
It doesn't.
Okay.
It just allows you, who was awarded the home, to be able to manage and pay and access all of that mortgage information.
But then the mortgage doesn't ever go in my name.
It doesn't go in your name at that point. No, it does not. So in an ideal situation, both spouses would like to get what they want, right? The one spouse wants to come off of that mortgage. The other spouse wants to go on that mortgage, but they want to keep the interest rate that they have, right? So they try and do that qualified assumption where they apply to assume the original terms of that mortgage and release the other spouse from liability. We talked about the different types of loans that are assumable, but conventional loans are not assumable, at least not under the original terms of the mortgage.
Really?
Correct. They're not assumable.
What do the majority of people have?
Conventional financing. So that doesn't mean that a conventional loan can't go through a qualified assumption. However, the servicer can make up their own rules. There's no federal laws on how that would work. So each servicer might have their own rules. They might want to see a year or 2 years worth of payments being made before they would ever consider it. They might want you to make a principal reduction payment of 10 or 5% more on the mortgage balance to even consider it. And then they might even come back after all of that and say, yeah, we'll allow you to do an assumption, but the interest rate is going to be much closer to what market interest rates are now, not necessarily their rate that you have locked in. And it's not because they're being deceptive. It's just business. Why would they do that for you to protect your 3.5% interest rate when they should be really getting closer to a market interest rate for that? So it's just business.
My follow-up question for you there, Mark, is in terms of a conventional loan where some of those other protections aren't in place, as you just mentioned, as someone who's about to get a divorce, hypothetically, if one of our listeners is about to get a divorce, are there any things they can do to prevent getting essentially whacked like that?
I'm going to go with the look on his face. No.
Other than...
The look on his face says no. There's our answer.
Well, no, I mean, other than coming to some sort of agreement where the other spouse stays on the mortgage, stays on title, and that person makes the payment until such a point in time in the future where it's financially beneficial.
Yeah, because if you think about it, if you know that I'm buying a house and, you know, my payment at the current interest rates, even a 5%, which would be what, 2.5% or 3% lower than the current interest rates. I mean, it's a huge, huge savings in what my mortgage payment would be.
Correct.
So you take a spouse who's considering getting a divorce, which means they'll lose half their income. Potentially they might have alimony or child support, but even taking that out of the equation, if you're at a mortgage payment of $1,000 or something, and now it's going to go up to $1,300 or $1,400, that could totally change your decision to keep the home.
Oh, absolutely. When I consult with divorcing homeowners, really what we find is that it's all really more about cash flow each month than it is about preserving the rate. They think it's about preserving that interest rate because they've conditioned to think, well, 3.5% is better than 7%, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, it really all comes down to cash flow. So let's say you were awarded the home and you took on some marital debt that you are now responsible for. Well, looking at doing a cash out refi and consolidating all that stuff, even though it might be a higher interest rate, you might still be improving your monthly cash flow. If that's the case, that's usually far more attractive to people than giving up that interest rate once they see the numbers on how this impacts their cash flow.
My recommendation would be to meet with a financial advisor or CDFA before you make these decisions to determine, you know, what's best for you.
Yeah, and your CPA.
Mark and Paula, as you're discussing all these things today, my big takeaway is just like anything related to personal finance and divorce, as we've said in many episodes before, is such a stressful period of time. The financial aspect of it sometimes gets overlooked, and there are so many intricacies, permutations, pick whatever 7-letter word you want out of this whole situation, especially when it comes to mortgages and homes. You have to take the time to stop down and talk to professionals about it and make sure you get it right, because these mistakes can be so costly.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Thank you, John. So, Mark, how does somebody get a hold of you?
So I'm here in Metropolitan Detroit. I have a telephone number at 248-379-6749, or my website, which is thatmortgagebanker.com.
Thank you, Mark. If anybody'd like to get a hold of me, they can reach me at paula@paulachristine.com, or they can check out my website at paulachristine.com. Thanks again, Mark.